Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Zak Ford, for coming to talk about your book, Call-Ups. I've been reading it. It's very enjoyable. It's a fun read and some interesting stories. I bet your interviews are even more interesting.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Um, Thanks for having me to chat about Called Up. Uh, is it all right time for me to go ahead and share the screen or?
Sure, let me just give a real my quick bio,
Okay.
so then you can, I know you have more details you'll fill in, but Zak is a chapter leader for the Dusty Baker Sacramento chapter. Um, he serves on the advisory committee of the Pacific Coast League Historical Society, which is kind of neat, and he lives in Cameron Park, California. If you'd like to turn on your presentation, let's rock and roll.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Go ahead and get the ball rolling here. And all right. So everybody's just seeing that first screen with the cover and the title, correct?
Yep.
All right. So thank you very much for having me and having me chat about my new book, Called Up, which is Ballplayers Remember Becoming Major Leaguers. First off, I'll do a little bit about myself. I'm chair of the Dusty Baker Sacramento SABR Chapter. Um, Also very involved in the Pacific Coast League Historical Society. It's been something that's been it's very special to me, dating back over 30 years. Prior to the Giants and Dodgers arrival on the West Coast, the Pacific Coast League was almost considered a third major league. And my great uncle was in the league, and I got to befriend a lot of his former teammates and opponents. So that's a very important part of my background is the Pacific Coast League. Um, and a little bit about me that goes into, why I would do this particular book, why I would put together this book on first person player narratives about call-ups and debuts. I'm lucky that when I was a pretty young baseball fan, I discovered the book Glory of Their Times. And what really resonated with me about that book is that Larry Ritter put together those first person player narratives in a way that I can connect to those players as people. They were oftentimes a century older than me, but I was able to relate to them as human beings because they were put together as human interest stories. So I've always had kind of a preference when it gets to obtaining information, reading, to have that first person narrative. I always thought that those oral histories are typically superior, at least in my opinion, for capturing the emotions and feelings of various stories. Um, like all of us, I dreamed of becoming a Major League Baseball player, but I struggled to hit about 200 in Little League. So when you're hitting, around the Mendoza line in Little League, your big league dreams, you know, aren't too realistic. So, but I'm 45 now, and I still occasionally dream about taking the field at Candlestick Park, even though that's not humanly possible, for multiple reasons. Especially the least of that Candlestick Park does not exist any longer. Um, Another thing about me that is important in the development of this book was that my great uncle, Larry Powell, was a phantom big leaguer in 1946. He was considered a pretty big prospect on the West Coast in the Pacific Coast League prior to the war. Served in the war almost 5 years, came back and made the team out of spring training in 1946 with the Red Sox. But the Red Sox got off to a pretty hot start that year, and the services of a near 32-year-old rookie that had been overseas the majority of the last 5 years were not needed. So the Red Sox released him. He got picked up by the Boston Braves across town and was with them for about a week or two. The exact same thing happened without getting into a game. But I was always interested, and I wish that I had tried to capture the feelings and emotions that he had during that roller coaster few weeks of being a Major League Baseball player. However, I know that he was very disappointed that he never got a stat line to prove that he was a big league baseball player at one time. So never got around to ask him. Unfortunately, he's gone, long gone, but somebody that's very, very important to me. Here you can see a picture of me looking like I'm intimidated by a photographer. My elbows in, looks like I'm scared of an inside pitch. Here I am as Will Clark in Halloween 1989, probably. And then here's my uncle, and then a few of the photos with him, and since then at Fenway Park, where I kind of take him there with a photo. So about went about told a little bit about me. Uh, I'll share a little bit about the book now. It's a collection of 109 first-person player stories. They're all original interviews. And what I tried to do was capture the feelings and emotions of becoming a Major League Baseball player. So it's not a detailed breakdown of game details or a time frame. I wanted to see what the behind the scenes information was, what was going through their head when they got the news, who were some of the people they called, etc. The feelings and emotions of that particular call up or of that debut. Debuts range from 1961 all the way to 2018. The earliest debut in the book, 1961, is Sam McDowell. Came up with the Indians, an 18-year-old that year. And the most recent debut is 2018, Patrick Wisdom with the St. Louis Cardinals. He is the only active player in the book. He's currently with the Chicago Cubs. And Major League service time ranges from just 2 days to over 2 decades. I hadn't planned on including a phantom big league ball player, meaning that they were on a big league roster but didn't get into a game. But there was one player that just had too good of a story to not include. And he only had 2 days Major League service time before he got sent back down. And then I have Jerry Royce. Jerry Royce spent over 2 decades in the big leagues. So quite a diverse amount of Major League tenure. I arranged the book in debut order, in time frame sections. So you can see kind of some common themes throughout. So I got 60s and 70s, 80s, 90s, and since 2000. And nearly all teams are represented. I believe that the Astros and the Diamondbacks, just the way it just worked out when I went out and got releases, I just didn't have the releases returned to me from a couple of players that I had interviewed from those teams. So I'll go over the time frame sections to give you a little bit of context of what's going on, what's impacting Major League rosters and call-ups during those particular times. In the 60s and 70s, obviously you had a huge amount of expansion from 16 to 26 teams. A lot of minor leagues disbanded. You had your first amateur draft. And there were a lot of changes too with labor conditions as well. 17 players from this particular time frame, the 60s and 70s. 1980s starts off with some labor strife. There's some stories in there that are impacted by the 1981 strike. Obviously, the role of relief pitchers and closers actually really kind of began in the 70s, grew into the 80s and into the 90s. But obviously, those changes to have more of a prominent, relief pitching presence in your bullpen definitely has impacted Major League rosters over the last generation or so. There was a period also in the 80s where teams were only at 24 players as opposed to 25. So there are 15 players from the 1980s. 1990s, another decade of expansion from 26 to 30 teams. More labor challenges, definitely some stories that are impacted by the lockout. and then also the strike. Changes to the disabled list definitely made roster moves more frequent, a lot more ups and downs. 42 players from the decade of the 90s, so definitely the most stories in that particular decade. Since 2000, obviously statistical analysis has been around since before then, but really over the last generation, last 20 years or so, really gained a lot of prominence in how they use statistical analysis to move rosters around. Huge changes with minor league restructuring, and then obviously even a lot more changes to now what's called the injured list, making roster moves very frequent. 35 players from this particular time frame. Also, it's not limited to a particular decade, but obviously the impact, the rise in international talent has changed major league rosters as well. So I told you a little bit about me. I've told you a little bit about the book. I'll tell you a little bit about the structure of the stories, and then I'll get into a few stories. So again, about the stories, they're a collection of first-person human interest stories. And the goal was to capture what can't be obtained from a box score, the feelings and emotions of becoming a Major League Baseball player. So you have the behind-the-scenes stuff, like I said earlier, the emotions of calling up your mom or your dad, telling them you got the news, the orientation process of getting to that Major League clubhouse, how it feels when you're rushing in to the mound from the bullpen. I wanted to capture the feelings and emotions that those ball players are feeling at that moment. The first question I asked players was, when did you first realize you had the talent to become a Major League Baseball player? Now, this question may sound as if I'm asking because I want to have an answer like when I was a senior in high school, or when I was a junior in college, or when I was in AA. No, the reason I asked this question, because I knew it would go back, it would spark memories of early mentors when they were really trying to, click, where things really kind of happened for them. And I know that a lot of those references that they made reoccurred. They brought back stories or references to those coaches or those mentors, or those feelings that they felt when they were in high school or their college. They brought those back when they were talking about their call-ups or debuts. So I knew that that would do something that would spark up their memory, and then they'd be a little bit more prepared for the interview later on, as far as adding a little bit more detail with specific folks. And they've only been edited. The stories have only been edited minimally from the interview transcripts. So if somebody's, talking to me, telling me a story, they wrap up, then I have a follow-up question about something earlier on and what they're saying. Obviously, I then put that text up a little bit higher. Or if somebody says something like, I went out, I pitched 5 or 6 innings. If I go out and I find that it was 5 innings, I'll, correct that. But pretty much those are the changes. That's it. So it will read like spoken word. I wanted to make sure that these interviews, when you're reading it, it sounds like the ball players telling you their story, as opposed to a writer telling you a different person's story. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get into some stories. First off, Steve Woodard. So Steve Woodard, 5th-round pick by the Brewers in 1994, has a fairly quick rise to the big leagues. In Single A and Double A, he has the same pitching coach, Mike Caldwell. He's pitching coach in the Brewers system at the time, and he's something like 14-3, and it's in July. Which is just insane to be 14-3 in July, right? And he gets called up to AAA, and he's there. He wins his first game. He's quickly called up. But was one of the things that was nice is that AAA manager got, Mike Caldwell on the phone, and they were able to share that moment together. Somebody that was very important to Steve Woodard's development. Now, he arrives, and he has quite a good debut. It's the first game of a doubleheader. that was actually a rescheduled game from earlier in the year. The first batter he faces, Otis Nixon, gets a double. He does not allow a hit the whole rest of his time in the game, 8 innings. He allows one hit, only walks one, 0 runs, 12 Ks. And on top of this, the guy on the other side of the field going back out inning after inning with him is Roger Clemens. He outduels Roger Clemens, who has one heck of a game himself that particular day. He threw 8 innings and only allowed 1 run. But Steve Woodard outdueled him that particular day. So these are his story. These are his words talking about that game and that day. The first batter of the game was Otis Nixon. I'll never live it down because I do a lot of stuff with Otis now. He led off the game with a double right off the bat, down the left field line. But that was the only hit I gave up that day. I got the next guy to fly out. Then my first big league strikeout was Joe Carter. Carlos Delgado was up next, and I was able to strike him out too. From that point on, it was like I was in a dream world. I could never have expected the day to end up like it did, going 8 shutout innings, striking out 12, and only giving up the 1 hit to the first batter I faced. I don't think I could write that script, especially with Bob Uecker calling the game. I got the video of his voice doing it. It was an amazing day sitting there and watching Roger Clemens pitch. I'm pitching against him and matching him inning for inning. He won the Cy Young Award that year too. Roger was really cool about everything. After the game, he came over to the clubhouse. I walked out and he introduced himself. He told me, "Kid, go back in there and get your jersey." I went back in there, got the jersey, and he signed it for me. I've got that jersey hanging up at home, and it's something I will cherish for the rest of my life. And you could see that this is an image of this particular jersey that Steve Woodard texted me, and I ended up including in the book. Steve Woodard's story, quite a good one. All right. The next one is a nice one, special one for me, because Jeff Jenkins actually grew up in the same town as me, went to the same high school as me. He's a few years older, so we didn't overlap. But when I was a young journalist in high school, I actually covered his brother, who was in the Giants system at that particular time. And so I got to go over to the Jenkins house when Jeff was at USC and got to know him that way. In fact, he actually, small world, he ended up growing up just a few houses down from my wife. I didn't know that until many years later, but one of those small world things to Jeff Jenkins. In fact, I'm wearing a Jeff Jenkins shirt tonight. But first round pick of the Brewers, 1995. And in 1998, towards the beginning of the season, he's with Louisville, and he's told by his AAA manager that he's going to be going up to the big leagues. His debut is at Candlestick Park. Now, he grew up in Rancho Cordova. I grew up in the same place, which is only about an hour and a half away. So the Giants were his team. He grew up going to the Dusty Baker School of Baseball, which he actually had Dusty coordinated in Rancho Cordova. So he faced Dusty Baker in the Giants, his very first game. And he faces Oral Hershiser. Oral Hershiser in his year with the Giants. Oral Hershiser, obviously longtime Dodger, who Jeff used to watch when he used to go to games for USC. When he went down to USC when he was in college, he went to a lot of games at Dodger Stadium, watched Oral pitch. He has a great game. He's 2 for 4. He has a single and a home run. Obviously, he's been since had a great career with the Brewers and has since been honored on their Wall of Honor and their the American Family Field Walk of Fame. But here are his words about his debut. "I vividly remember being excited nervous, but not scared nervous. If you're scared in this game, you won't make it. I got out there about 45 minutes before the game and started running sprints, just trying to calm myself. When you get in the game, you just kind of let the switch go off. You clear your head and you go in there and you hit. My first at bat, I lined a single to center. Then my third at bat, I hit a home run. It was awesome. I had 2 busloads of people come down to watch me play, including my grandma. She must have been in her mid to late 80s at the time. She was sitting down the left field line. She had a guy in front of her, and the guy knew I was in the game because she had told him. When I hit the home run, the guy stands up and he's going nuts. He's cheering and screaming, and he turns around and is like, "Hey, Grandma, did you see your grandson hit that home run?" She's like, "I would have if you weren't standing in front of me." It was a special moment. And after the game, I didn't know how many people were there, but there were probably 150. And almost all of them waited for me to congratulate me as I came out of the clubhouse. It was a really neat moment for me. We all have those moments in our lives where we could vividly remember sights, smells, and their senses. For me, that's one of those days that I could remember. I could remember how the wind was moving and how the smells were in the ballpark. Even right now, I'm getting chills thinking about it. It's one of those days that's etched in stone for me. All right, Jeff Jenkins. Got another brewer before I get into some of the other ones. Jim Rushford. Jim Rushford comes up in 2002 with the Brewers. Now he's undrafted out of San Diego, out of college. He takes about a year or so off, has a stint in independent ball. Then he's released, takes a little bit of time off, goes back to independent ball. And then he kind of just things kind of click for him. He gets signed as a undrafted free agent by the Brewers and just shoots through their system. Has an incredible year in 2001, primarily in the California League. But it in 2002 has a great year as well. And he's expecting a call up sometime in September. But right around that time, he ends up pulling his groin, and it slows down the process. And they have to keep him there for a few more days. But he finally gets the news, heals up enough. He hops in the minivan with his wife and young daughter and drives straight to Chicago. Now he's from Chicago. He grew up a Chicago Cubs fan. He has a fairly challenging night that night. He starts off one of the first plays. He ends up with an error, but he ends up having a couple of solid plays after that. He goes 0 for 4 off of Matt Clement. But his son is currently in the Brewers system, or I'm sorry, in the Royals system. But quite an interesting story with the multiple stints in independent league and then kind of a skyrocket shot to the big leagues in just about a two pro season, 2001, 2002. But these are his comments on making the big leagues. For me, it was like winning the lottery. I got a 1 in a million ticket. I had to do so much and overcome so many odds to get there. The odds were far against me. I'm just grateful somehow it worked out. I accomplished the thing I wanted to do in life. I wouldn't trade it for anything, and it's kind of made everything else easier for me. Because when you do what you always wanted to do, you're more at peace with yourself. So that's Jim Rushford's story. All right, I don't know where I'm at as far as time goes. I'll do what about maybe a couple more, and then I could do Q&A. Does that sound about right, Dennis?
Works for me.
All right, cool. All right, I'm going to go to Bobby Grich, a favorite of a lot of SABR folks. 1970, he's with the Rochester Red Wings, and he's having one heck of a year. That team is stacked. I think he has Don Baylor batting after him. He had somebody that was real solid under, and it was pretty much he was getting great pitches to hit. I want to say he was somewhere around like 380 or something like that when he got the news. Cal Ripken Sr. pulls him into the office. Cal Ripken Sr. is a big, heavy smoker and blows his, camel smoke up in the air and says, "You're reporting to Baltimore tomorrow." So Earl Weaver reports to Baltimore and Memorial Stadium. He's walking into the clubhouse and he sees a door that says manager's office and is cracked open a little bit. And he sees that Earl Weaver is sitting there in his chair at his desk. He knocks on the door, peeks his head in, and says, "Mr. Weaver, I'm here. I'm Bobby Grich. I'm here to report for my first day in the big leagues." And Earl Weaver just looks up and says, "Is there anything else that you need to tell me?" And he says, "No, sir. I guess that's it." All right. And that was it. Uh, Bobby Grich said that he was kind of shocked that Weaver didn't get up, shake his hand, congratulate him, say, "Hey, this is what's going to happen," give him a little bit of an orientation. But yeah, Earl Weaver wasn't really known as a very warm and fuzzy guy, obviously. But things worked out for Bobby Grich and Baltimore because he ended up becoming a team Hall of Famer. And then obviously also a team Hall of Famer with the Angels too when he went over there later. But he has that interaction with Earl Weaver, and then he takes the bus from Memorial Stadium over to Washington so he could play the Senators. The pitcher for the Senators that day is a guy by the name of Casey Cox. Unfortunately, a guy just passed away within the last few weeks, months or so. But Casey Cox had actually attended the same high school as Bobby Grich. He was a few years older than Bobby Grich. They didn't overlap. But to face somebody who had gone to the same high school in California, on the mound in Washington, is pretty impressive, pretty interesting. But he goes 0 for 3 with a walk. Bobby Grich does that day for his debut. The next day, he goes in the locker room and he sees a cake in the locker room that says, "Welcome to Baltimore, Bobby." And these are his words. Frank Robinson and all the other guys come in. He said, "Who bakes a cake for somebody who gets a walk? You didn't do anything last night. You got a walk. What's this cake all about?" He was giving me a bad time. I said, "Well, come on in, guys. Have a piece of this cake." Pete Richard took a piece of the cake and took a bite. He goes, "Wait a minute. That's sour cream. Smell that." I started to smell it, and he goes, "No, put your nose a little bit closer to it." I heard somebody kind of giggle. I knew right then he was going to throw my face down into that cake if I got close enough. It was a total setup. My instincts picked up on it. I jumped away, and he tried to push me down. I think the tip of my nose hit the cake, but that was it. So he didn't get me. That was the first time I had seen that prank. Anytime we had a rookie called up during the season from there on out, I was in on the joke. We got a lot of rookies after that. They would go over, smell the cake, and somebody would come behind them and slam their face into it. It was pretty funny. That's Bobby Grich's orientation to the big leagues. I'll do one more. I'm going to skip up a little bit to Ryan Rowan Smith. Ryan Rowan Smith, undrafted free agent out of Australia in 2000. He's represented Australia 3 times in the World Baseball Classic and even in the Summer Olympics. He's going through the Mariners system. Just not really on their radar too much. And he actually ends up getting Rule 5 picked by the Twins in 2004. Goes to spring training with them. Twins decide not to keep him, so he goes back to the Mariners. All right. Obviously, he's put in a situation where he's like, okay, well, the rubber's starting to meet the road. I need to really kind of figure things out. He's, starting to have a pretty good year in 2005. 2006 has a great year. But in 2006, too, one of his coaches becomes a coach in the Arizona Fall League that fall. And that coach really advocates for Ryan Rowan-Smith to take one of those roster spots on the Arizona Fall League team. So he takes that spot. He has a great Arizona Fall League, and it continues into the beginning of the 2007 season. 2007, it's May, fairly early in the year, and he gets called up. All right. So he's focused on the minor leagues. Not sure quite where the Mariners are at that particular time. He gets the news. He gets out of the Miners' dugout, and this is what he does. These are his words. I got outside and Googled who we were playing. We were playing the Yankees. They had a bunch of lefties in that lineup. Jason Giambi, Hideki Matsui, Johnny Damon, all those guys. I'm like, no freaking way. Not the Yankees. Can't I just face Tampa Bay on a Tuesday? I can't handle this. So this is what his feelings are going into that series with the Yankees. He arrives there. One of the first things he notices in the clubhouse is that his jersey is misspelled. Ryan Rowan-Smith is not spelled correct on his back. So he's like, well, do I tell the clubby? I don't know. He ends up telling the clubby, but he has to go out to the bullpen without a jersey. About mid-game or so, they bring him out the correct jersey, but he doesn't get into that game, doesn't get into a game at all. He gets sent back down. These are his words. I get 3 days in the big leagues and I don't pitch. There were a good few weeks where I thought that was going to be my story. I get called up, never pitch. No kid's ever going to believe me. I was freaking out in AAA. I'm like, don't get hurt. Just be patient. I was scared to death. I was never going to have a stat line to prove I was a Major League Baseball player. So he goes back to the minor leagues for a few weeks, gets the call again. And when he gets that call, they're facing the Reds and King Griffey Jr. in Seattle for the very first time since King Griffey Jr. left Seattle. And I'm just going to read the rest of Ryan Rowan-Smith's story. I went back up, and the first night we were playing the Reds, King Griffey Jr. was back in town for the first time. Again, no soft landing. I'm like, man, can't we just be playing somebody that's not very good and make it easy for me? They had a ceremony. The place was packed. We're down 16-1. I'm like, okay, tonight's my night. This is going to happen. I start getting loose, and they said, you're going to face a lefty. Obviously, the lefty is going to do a lefty-lefty matchup, right? The three lefties in that lineup were Josh Hamilton, Adam Dunn, and King Griffey Jr. They're all all-stars. I just don't want to face King Griffey Jr. the first time. I was so nervous. Lo and behold, the first hitter I ever faced was King Griffey Jr. Everybody's on their feet. They all want to see him hit a home run. I come in, they're on their feet, but it's not for me. I felt like I hadn't thrown a baseball in months. My hand was numb, and all I was thinking was, just throw strikes. Do not walk him. You've got to remember something. I grew up in Australia in the 90s, before the internet. We didn't have access to players, but we did have access to guys like King Griffey Jr. because he was on The Simpsons. Here I am thinking, man, this dude was on the freaking Simpsons. People back home know who he is. I remember I threw my last warm-up pitch, walked around the mound, and tried to look cool. I'm like, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. Willie Broomquist was our shortstop. He walked over to me and said, hey, man, enjoy it. It's just another hitter. Have some fun. That calmed me down a little. I said to myself, just throw strikes. All of a sudden, I had 2 strikes against him. I'm looking at that iconic stance, and I'm like, I'm going to try and snap off the biggest curveball of my life here. I did. He swung over it. I swear the place booed me. My mom and dad had flown over, but their flight got delayed and they missed the game. When I picked them up, my mom asked, did you pitch? I said, yeah, I did. She was bummed. Then I told her I faced King Griffey Jr. and she said, oh my God. That's Ryan Rowan-Smith's story. All right. So I guess at that, if you have any questions, definitely would love to answer them. If you're interested in the book, there's actually a special now at McFarland. McFarland has 25% off. If you go to the McFarland website and type in Holiday 23, Amazon also has it off for around 20% off or something like that. It's like $6.61 off. Why they have that number, I don't know. But that's also off the current Amazon price too. So plenty of opportunities to get the book. Definitely would appreciate your interest in it. And I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen and be happy to answer any questions that any of you may have.
A question I have real quick, Zach, is how did you get 109 players to do the interviews?
Well, the goal was originally to have between 75 and 100 players in the book. And I started reaching out to folks all sorts of different ways. I would say probably at least somewhere in the ballpark of probably 2/3 of the players that I interviewed, I got off of social media. So I would search Facebook or I would search Twitter and say like MLB alum or something like that. And oftentimes a lot of the players would have that in their little bios. So I'd reach out, maybe have a Facebook friend, and then it would just kind of grow. Then you'd have suggestions of other players. Why I ended up with 109, as I said, the original goal was 75 to 100. I was able to reach that fairly quickly. So then I ended up in a situation where okay, well, I want to just crush my goal. So then the goal became 150. I ended up interviewing 149 players for the book. When I was at SABR 50 in Baltimore, I was talking to a lot of the different publishers. A lot of the publishers were interested in the concept, and when I was telling them about it, I was telling them about how many stories, about the average length of each story, and doing the math, and it was about 130, 140,000 words. All of the publishers said, no, this book needs to be more like 85, 90,000 words. All right, so I didn't originally have releases from anybody. They wanted me to get releases. I did a request for releases, and I ended up with 109 releases back. Just this is how it worked. I got permission from McFarland to go up to, I was doing the math as I was putting together these stories. Each one was somewhere around 850 words. And I was doing the math, and I reached out to McFarland and I said, hey, look, I think I'm going to exceed 90,000 words with 109 stories. So I got permission to go up to 95,000 words. And the way it worked out with 109 stories, I had the 109 stories. I did my preface and my introduction in separate documents. I copied and pasted into that. And I'm not kidding, I was 95,000 words exact. Just the way the 109 stories worked, 100% perfect coincidence. That's a very long answer, but yeah, that's a very complete, thorough answer.
Well, Zach, thanks for that presentation. And thank you also for wearing a Brewer shirt. That's a good way to win friends. I don't have your book, but I looked at the table of contents online, and it looks like the type of book I would particularly like is you could just open to any page and start reading right there. So that's a nice part of the book. Now, in your book, who played the longest without being called up?
Jaw Leach. Jaw Leach was drafted, I want to say, in 1990. He got his cup of coffee with the Giants in 2001. He was in multiple organizations during that time. Ultimately ended up about 3 weeks, I think, in the big leagues. But definitely, that's a lot of minor league service time. 12 seasons.
You mentioned the cake trick that Baltimore had. Was there any other teams that had some kind of trick for the rookies?
No, nothing like that. Not really like that. I mean, there would be, as far as the call-ups go, there'd be managers that would, say, okay, you're traded to the Yankees, or you're traded here, or you're traded to Japan or Korea or wherever, to try and, have a little bit of humor with the call-up part. Oftentimes, when they were getting to the big league camps or the big league locker rooms, it was kind of interesting. A lot of them, especially amongst the more recent ones, We're talking about how, it's, you're going to that clubhouse and it's pretty much business. Is a lot of them were, I was kind of surprised. A lot of the more recent ones are a little bit more focused too.
Yeah, I want to thank you for the presentation as well. I love the story you finished with. That's just a great story. So, did you have any favorites? Either favorite interviews or just favorite players, or what are your favorites?
Yeah. What's funny is I started interviewing players for this book in November of 2019. And I'd interview a player and I'd be like, oh, this is a great story. This is the best I've heard. And then a week or two later, I'd interview a story and I'd be like, oh gosh, this is a great story. It's the best I've heard. And this, it was like a cycle, right? So if you asked me what the best story is, next week, I may give you a different answer than what I give you tonight. Obviously there are certain stories that resonate with me a little bit more than some of the others. One of them that was, resonated with me the one book or the one story I really wanted to have in this book was the Adam Greenberg story. I'm not sure if you've heard how many of you have heard of Adam Greenberg, but Adam Greenberg came up with the 2005 Chicago Cubs. Comes in as a pinch hitter against the Marlins. Very first pitch of his very first major league at bat, he gets beamed. And it's not just a bean that impacts his baseball life. It's a beaning that impacts how he's able to do things off the field too. He keeps trying to come back. It doesn't work. Has stints in independent ball. About 7 or 8 years later, somebody hears about his story and there's this campaign, basically a marketing campaign, basically to get him his one official major league at bat, his one at bat campaign. And he's had stints in independent ball. He stayed active. He was playing with Team Israel at that particular time. The Marlins, who were obviously the team on the opposite side in 2005, give him the opportunity to suit up and get his one major league at bat. He goes in there, he pinch hits. He's facing R.A. Dickey. R.A. Dickey that year won the Cy Young, and he was near unhittable that year. Greenberg goes in, strikes out on 3 pitches, gets a standing ovation. Pretty good story.
That's great.
One of the other stories that I don't highlight a huge amount, which I thought was just phenomenal, is the one story of the phantom major leaguer that I decided to include. I wasn't, like I said, originally I wasn't planning on including major league anybody if they did not have a debut. I figured you had that a call-up and a debut. But then I thought, okay, well, this guy's story is just too good to not include. 2002, he's called up by the Padres. And late in the game, he's warming up. There's a guy on base. There's 1 out. There's a phone. The bullpen phone rings. And the other end says, hey, look, if this batter gets a hit, Shibbolow's coming in. The guy gets a hit. Well, the runner decides he wants to score. The runner gets thrown out at home. The hitter then decides he wants to try and go over to second. He thinks he has plenty of time to get over to second. He doesn't. He gets thrown out at second. It's the end of the inning. The Padres hit the next inning. The game is over. Gets in a plane, heads off to the next city. Bruce Bochy calls him to the front of the plane and says, hey, bud, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to send you down. I need a different guy. Never gets back up to the big leagues. That obviously is not the most uplifting story, but that would a pretty darn interesting story to me. And to me, people always make wisecracks about Moonlight Graham. Moonlight Graham has nothing on Andy Shibboleth. Moonlight Graham has a stat line. Moonlight Graham's in the record books and is well known. other than maybe Larry Yount, who got hurt during his warm-up pitches, I don't think you could get much closer than Andy Shibboleth to crossing that line. So another long-winded question, or long-winded answer, but those two stories really kind of resonate with me. Again, if you ask me next week, probably something else. I may give you another 109.
No, it's all
So
super fun. Thank you.
We'll have to start watching, see where he's going to be next week or the week after, and we'll sign in and then remind him that he had different answers. So yeah,
we'll get through the whole book. Yeah.
Yeah. Dave, I have a problem with your opening the book anywhere and starting reading. I'm sorry, I have to start at the book, front of the book. I read the introduction and all of that. I can't skip it. The idea of just opening the book to the middle, when you said that, I almost shuddered. Like, oh, you're absolutely right. You can. It's that kind of book, but I don't know. I just can't do that.
You're muted. But
yeah. Don't think that I don't read the whole book, but I can open it up.
We're losing you, Dave.
He just muted himself.
I think he just muted himself. I see. Yeah. There you go, Dave.
Yeah.
We'll try it again. Anyway, I don't have the book, but if I go into a bookstore, then I can just pick it up and start reading it right there and, enjoy it. And then I'm sure I'll buy the book. I had a question up here, and that is, Zach, was there any player who was less than very willing to talk with you?
No, not really. I mean, keep in mind, I wasn't going after Hall of Famers or like well-known folks that require publicists and agents. I was going after, a bit of everybody. I mean, I reached out to, there are plenty of all-stars. There are huge, there are some, all-stars in the book. But it wasn't like I was going after huge stars. So most of these players, if I reached out to them, they were, happy to be recognized and happy that I was willing or, interested in including them. And those folks that, maybe didn't want to talk to me, they just didn't respond. But I didn't have anybody who was, overly negative or anything like that. And then this is a pretty, positive theme book too. So anybody that was not willing to talk or negative about it probably just wouldn't have responded to me.
Thank you.
So a little trivia. Does anybody know? There are two Hall of Famers that I know of who have a birthday today. Does anybody know who the two are? So one pitched for the Cubs and Rangers from Canada.
Oh, Fergie.
Yep.
Fergie. He's 81 years old. And the second was...
That's why you got the Jenkins shirt on.
Who, me?
No, Zach.
No, I actually have...
No.
So I'm wearing the shirt of the second player. It says
Larry
birthday.
Doby. Yes, I've seen him all over social. Yes, Larry Doby.
Larry
it's his
Doby.
100th birthday, right?
100th. Yeah.
Wow.
And I just saw a post from Donna Muscarella, the Lens of Donna M, that he was posthumously given the Congressional Gold Medal. They had a ceremony today, so kind of too late, but that's cool. On his 100th birthday, this second player to integrate, well, the first player in the American League and the second Black manager in the major leagues. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And I have my Larry Doby shirt on, number 14.
Yeah. And Zach didn't get that interview.
I'm sorry, what's
that?
Zach, you didn't get that interview, his call up. Yeah.
Yeah. But one of the things that I wish, because I had, as I had referenced earlier on when I was doing a little bit about my background, was I got to, as a teenager, through my uncle going to a lot of his old, reunions, got to befriend a lot of players from that era, even earlier than that era. And I wish that, obviously I wish they were all around, but I feel blessed that I had the opportunity to chat with them when they did. I just wish that I had more thorough or professional interviews with them. But I mean, maybe there's something nice about having interview transcripts of a 14-year-old, 15-year-old green baseball nerd, interviewing guys that, faced Babe Ruth or Ted Williams. And there's probably a lot of reference to going, oh, that's totally cool, stuff like that, which isn't the most professional response, but
yeah. You're
but I did
mentioning
get a lot.
the glory of the times is what got you started. I always, anytime I'm in a used bookstore, I always pick up copies of Glory of the Times, because anybody asks me, is there any baseball book you should ever read? I hand them that. And so yeah. The book does, your first person where it's in their words and everything, it really works very well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we get out of here, can you pick a number between 1 and 8 so we can give away a copy of the book? Number 5. Number 5, Jim Williams.
Oh my gosh.
Again? Oh
Really?
boy.
Wow.
I'm hot.
You need to play the lottery, Jim.
Yeah.
Like
Apparently,
right
yeah.
away.
Jim, you're the one in
Sure.
There's 2 Jim Williams. You're the one in Wisconsin, right?
Right. Correct.
Okay. We have Ben from Aberdeen, South Dakota, and Laura from Arlington, Virginia. They were 4 and 6. They was close. Sorry, guys. So
Jim, when you get this book, make sure you start reading it from the beginning. Otherwise, you get reprimanded.
oh, not
I'm-
reprimanded.
I'm-
It scares me. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm kind of like you, Dave. I like the books where you can pick it up at any point. Nice,
Yeah.
nice.
Read it reverse
Bite-sized
order,
pieces.
read it by decade, read it by, go to the index, read it by team, however you want to do it. They average about 850 words. They range everywhere from about 400 words to about 2,800 words, but on average about 800 words. So, you could pick it up if you have 5 minutes. You could read a story or two, regardless of whether or not where you grab it. And obviously there are overarching themes, but even though all these are about call-ups and debuts, they are very unique stories because they're all human stories. They all have different behind-the-scenes information, different families, feelings and emotions that these ball players are going through. They're all still very unique, even though all 109 are about those debuts and call-ups.
You mentioned, you're reading by decades or whatever. You mentioned that the more recent ball players are more business-like. Did you see trends of how call-ups are done, or how players reacted by generations, or did you notice some differences doing that?
Yeah, I mean, for example, some of the earlier ones, like Jerry Royce found out about his call-up by getting a registered letter in the mail, right? That would be unheard of now, right? And then obviously it's more in-person stuff, going in the 70s and the 80s. There's, more cell phones, voicemails, text message. Hey, bud, give me a call or get to this. So obviously has normal communication has progressed over the last, I guess there's, 60 plus years or around that of debuts since the first one, 62 years since the 61 debut. Obviously, a lot of different things have, evolved in communication outside of baseball too. So it's obviously reflective within these call-up stories and debuts. But it is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And I think also one of the trends too that you could is players over the last generation or so are more aware of what's going on at the big league level because they have access, of what's going on as far as statistics go, access goes, like health issue, as opposed to pre-internet days, a lot of the players couldn't, keep up on that quite as well. So things were a little bit more of a surprise when they did get the news. But just as all communication has changed, definitely has in the way ball players are getting the news too.
Yeah. In one of the player stories you mentioned, player mentioned that we didn't know what was going on, and we might see a sporting news every 3 weeks or so, and and we kind of share that around, and so you really didn't know what was going on. And in today's world, wouldn't you like to tell that to a 19-year-old ball player now that they, they would have any concept of that?
Yeah. cross your fingers. Do well, buddy. Maybe you'll get the call in 5 years of the journey or more. So, yeah. Nowadays, people are definitely, they have access to more information, which is definitely a good thing.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Zach, I'm enjoying the book. I knew I would. I love call-up stories. Always have enjoyed them. And so when I saw this book, this was, high on my list. And the biggest challenge going into December is that's always tough to schedule meetings. So I appreciate you finding the time to join us here in the Keltner chapter. And I highly recommend the book. If you like, I think to be a SABR member, one of the basics is we like stories, and these are a lot of just fun and interesting stories. So I'd recommend it.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's currently on sale at McFarland with Holiday 23 as the code, or on Amazon too. I think it's automatically just check the box for a discount. So,
Jim, I'm going to save money sending you the book. Yay.
Very good.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
look forward to seeing
Yeah,
it.
I will get that order tonight or tomorrow. So we'll do that. Okay. Anything else? Any other words of wisdom from Zach, or any other questions? If not, I'm going to say thank you again, and I will stop the recording. So yeah, thank you. Round of applause.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.